Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to share my screen. And what we're going to talk today about, and we have talked about it before, but we're going to talk about it again because it's something that I think can be a bit confusing. Probably the most complicated part about when we plan wills is the gift over, because that's where things get kind of hairy when we say, okay, if this at the end of the trust, or if this person's not alive, then this person, but if they're not alive, then this person, and when we've got multiple segments and things like that. So we're going to talk about residue gift overs today and the different options that are there and when to use them and how to use them. So you should all be able to see my screen, and we've got Homer, but the key here is we're in the residue section. Okay, so we're going to create a gift, and we'll just take a simple gift for now. Okay, for Bart, and we can create we'll create a trust. Doesn't really matter. We can do an age trust till age 25, let's just say, for Homer. So whatever you're doing, whether it's an absolute gift or it's a trust, there's a component called gift over right at the end. Okay, and that is necessary for ensuring, especially with a trust, if the beneficiary survives the testator but then dies before the end of the trust, what's going to happen? So that's where gift overs become so important for trust gifts. So under gift over, we have a few options. Okay, we have 4 kind of standard options, and then we have a flexible option. So we wanted to create gift overs that were common, that you could create with just one button. But then we also wanted the flexibility to do complicated gift overs. So I want to go through what each one does. So if we pick client's issue as the gift over, if this person, Bart, the beneficiary, dies before the end of the trust, then the balance is going to go to the client's issue. So that's Homer's issue. Okay, we have that as an option. We could add more than one gift over. So for example, we might want to do something where we say, okay, the first gift over, if Bart dies, is to Bart's kids. Well, Bart's the beneficiary, so we're going to pick beneficiary's issue. If you put in gift overs one after another, you'll see that they list them in order. You can rearrange the order, which is very important because the drafting will come out differently depending on how the order of the gift overs. Because here, think about it this way. If whatever's the first gift over, it says if Bart's not alive, give it to Homer's the client's issue. Then if the client has no issue, then give it to Bart's issue. That's the effect of this ordering. Okay, so it's very important that you think through the gift over as far as what should happen in each situation. If I want the more logical gift over, which is I want to go to Bart's kids if he has any, and only if he doesn't have any descendants, any issue, then I want it going to the client's issue. Then we need to order it in that order. And that's what this says. This says, first it goes to Bart's descendants if he has any. And if he doesn't have any, then it goes to the client's issue. Okay. Whenever it's a gift over to issue, that's a stirpidal, per stirpes distribution, right? It makes sense. You wouldn't want a per capita distribution for issue. Okay. So order is very important. We obviously don't allow 2 choices, you to pick both beneficiaries' children and beneficiaries' issue, because by definition, beneficiaries' issue includes beneficiaries' children, and then if they're not alive, to their kids. If you want to stop at the first level, so I only want Bart's living children to receive if he's not alive, then you would pick Bart's children. And again, you would reorder it so that Bart's children get first if he has any children, and then if he has no children, then client's issue. Okay. So that's the way that gift over ordering works. So those are a couple of options. So we have either beneficiary's children or beneficiary issue. We have client issue. Beneficiary is basically implied when there's an age condition. We assume that if he survives to age 25, he's the beneficiary of that money. So you don't have to include that, but you can include it. So here it would say at the end of the trust, it goes to the beneficiary, Bart. If Bart's not alive, then to Bart's children equally per capita. And then if Bart has no children, to the client's issue. And you can keep adding. So that's the idea. So those are the different options for people. Okay. I'm going to show you the specific distribution, a gift over now. This you use if you're talking about anyone other than the beneficiary's children as a class, or the client's issue. You could go to specific distribution. This is usually a person, a charity, a bunch of people divided in different percentages. You can do very fancy. You can basically do a residue gift for the gift over. And so you would do it the same way you would do a residue gift. If Bart's not alive and Bart has no children and Bart has and Homer has no descendants, then we want it to go to the father, for example. Okay. And we want the dad to get 50%, okay, of that gift over. And then we want, the brother to get the other 50%. And you could have further gift overs for his 50% to his kids or his issue or another specific distribution. So you can keep going. You can create another specific distribution if John's not alive for his gift over portion of Bart's gift over, et cetera, et cetera. And you just can keep going. And that's how you add more complicated gift overs. And of course, it can be very complicated. So we might say, listen, I want that specific distribution before it goes to client's issue as the very final one or whatever. And you can reorder things. But again, remember this, the ordering is important. It's only if there are no people alive in the gift over above that it would go down to the next gift over. So in this case, it would go to Bart first, then Bart's children. If Bart had no children, then it would go to the specific distribution. Okay? And that's basically how it works. That's how those gift overs work. That's if you've got one gift, et cetera. We have other options if there are a bunch of gifts. So let's say the estate was split. Bart got an equal part, and Lisa got an equal part. Okay. And let's say Maggie got an equal part. So there's the three kids each have their own portion. Okay. And for Lisa, the gift over, let's say it's a trust again to an age, doesn't matter, whatever age you want, doesn't have to be the same. We're having 3 separate trusts here. We go to the gift over. And now you'll see there's something called other segments. Okay. So what that means is if Lisa's not alive, right now I've put other segments as the only gift over. That means if Lisa's not alive at the end of the trust, then it's going to be distributed among the other segments. That's Bart's portion and Maggie's portion. Okay. So if you wanted to by default go to the other segments, in other words, if Lisa's not alive at the end of the trust, we want it to be distributed to Bart if he's alive, and if Bart's not alive, to whoever his gift over beneficiaries are, et cetera, then other segments is what you want. Okay. It's especially important for trust gifts, right? Because for an absolute gift, it's almost implied, right? You don't need to say other segments for an absolute gift, because the way floating shares work in a residue clause is it says only create the number of segments that you need based on who's alive. If Lisa's not alive, then we don't even need her segment. That means Bart's and Maggie's automatically increase, right? But for trusts, you do need them, because Lisa could survive and then die. We need to make sure that money goes somewhere. And by default, it's not going to go back to Bart's segment or Maggie's segment. Okay. And that's why trust Giftovers are so important. Okay. So, and again, we could choose to do it somewhat differently. We could say Lisa gets it. And then if Lisa's not alive at the end of the trust, her kids get it. And only if she has no kids do I want it to go to the other segments. Okay. And of course, other segments will only appear if there are other segments. So if you only have one gift, other segments is not an option. Okay. And again, this is fairly complicated. So we want to make sure that you understand the implications of that. So want to talk about that. Anybody have any questions for me?
Hi, Jordy. I have a quick question.
Sure.
In the same example, when you have Margaret Simpson there, hers is absolute, but wouldn't, just for the sake of making it all the same, wouldn't I do it to other segments as well?
Sure.
In that case, that would work?
You can.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. And in fact, what we're contemplating is for the things that are almost implicit, we should probably just show that so you know it's there. So we recognize that, and we don't want it to get overly complicated, but we do want it to reflect what's actually happening. But you're quite right that by default would go to other segments, right? But yeah, sure, you can put that in. The last kind of gift over that I want to show is if you've got a group of people. So if you have more than one person, there's one further gift over that automatically occurs, okay? If it sees that you've got more than one person, whether it's a class gift with more than one person or individuals with more than one person, by default, it assumes, because if you didn't want this, you'd do a separate trust. It assumes that this is like a group gift and it's going to go to the survivor if only one of them is alive, okay? So by default, that's going to be the highest level. It's going to go to the other one. Now, you might, in this case, say, no, I want to go to Bart and Daniel if they're alive. But if either of them predecease, I want their share to go to their kids, right? Well, that's a gift over. So you say, great, I want it first to go to beneficiaries' children. And only if they don't have children does it go to the other beneficiary. This is your typical gift over type clause, either beneficiaries' children or beneficiaries' issue, and then to the other beneficiaries. Because think about it this way. If I went like this and put it in this order, think about what happens. If either Bart or Daniel are not alive, whether they have kids or not, it's going to the other beneficiary first. And only if the other beneficiary is not alive would it go to the deceased children. So that's the difference there. That's the difference between the order. Okay. And so eState automatically, let me just show you what we do. Automatically, if you add beneficiaries issue or beneficiaries children, it's going to assume at first instance by default that you would want them first to get the predeceased beneficiary share. Now, if that wasn't correct, you can always move it around. But we figure that in most cases, that's what you would want. So we put that first when you're adding it as a gift over. Okay. And then you could, then of course you could add other segments as your further option if you wanted. So that's how gift overs work. Those are all the different options for gift overs. And I'd love to answer any questions people have, because this is really the most complicated part of it. Anybody? I'm just going to remove a couple things here and say, anybody have any questions? Just want to see one thing. One thing I'm going to actually add as an advisor insight is when we see that you haven't added enough Giftovers. So for example, in this case, I was just testing something to see if we had built it yet. But in this case, so we've got Bart, Lisa, and Lisa's is in a trust, okay? And we say, okay, if she survives and then dies, we only have, let me just do this. I think this is why we'll go death. So we've got Lisa, and then so for the rest of her lifetime, and then to her descendants. And that's the only Giftover, okay? If she didn't have any descendants, we've got a bit of a problem here, right? We have no Giftover. And so we are concerned about that. And so we want to certainly recommend that there be more further Giftovers for that person. And so that's one of the things we're going to actually build in here is if it sees, listen, we don't like this, that we think you should think about what happens if Lisa dies dies and there's still money left over and she has no descendants. You probably should add other segments as the further Giftover, right? It goes back to Bart and Maggie, back to the residue in essence. So that's one of the warnings that we're gonna build in, because we don't want obviously a lapse for a trust where you haven't provided for sufficient Giftovers. So we'll make a note of that. There's a question in the chat. Is there a way to provide a graphic to show the Giftover structure and place it to provide a visual representation? Is there a way to provide a graphic? There's no real way to provide a graphic, aside from in the graphic summary where it lists who are the Giftovers. One of the things that we're building, I say we have lots of things we're building. One of the things we're building is a moving summary that will show like a waterfall distribution of what happens if certain people are alive, et cetera. So that's coming down the pike this year. The live viewer, we're looking, it'll be next month coming up in April, and looking forward to it. I've seen some of the work on it, and it's really pretty cool that you can see what's going to be generated as you click Giftover. So, as I click this Giftover on the right side, I'll be able to see, the impact. Oh no, that's not what I want. So I'm going to change the order and see that live before you generate the document. So that's what, where does the floating share concept save the drafting? So whenever you create more than one, let me just generate a document. Let's just do a single wheel here. The whole idea of floating shares is in the opening of the residue. So it's going to say, divide the residue into as many equal shares as is necessary. That's the magic to floating shares. So we don't know how many shares we're going to have yet. We're going to, we'll know that once we know who's alive and how many shares we need. And so I'm just going to show you that wording right here. And that's the idea of the floating shares. That's automatic. We never draft a will in eState that is not floating shares, okay? You don't need floating shares if there's only one beneficiary. But whenever there's more than one beneficiary, it's always going to use floating shares, okay? And the number, and we don't use percentages, okay? Yes, you'll see we use percentages in the portal, and I'll just show you that in a second. So let me talk about that for a second. So let me just get rid of all of these things. So in this case, we chose to show it as parts, okay? One part, one part, one part, okay? We can show that. Sometimes that's how it's going to get drafted. It's always going to use the word parts. It's never going to use percentages, even if we click on percentages, because we don't use percentages in wills when you're dividing things up, because there could be a lapse. By definition, if you're using percentages, you've created 100 parts, and you have to make sure that even one of those doesn't lapse, because if you do, you have an intestacy, partial intestacy. So any drafting you're going to use is always in eState, in the document itself, always going to use, let me just go to that, always going to use parts, okay? As many parts. So even if I had used percentages, what it would have said is 33.3% parts segment 1, okay? That's the difference. If you're showing it in percentages and you choose percentages here, then in eState, it's going to draft it as 33.3 parts, 33.3 parts, 33.3 parts. Just because clients sometimes like that better than one part, one part, one part. But it works exactly the same. It will work exactly the same. And so that's the difference. And I can convert back to the parts if I want to show it that way. Okay. So that's the only impact. The drafting itself will always refer to floating shares. Never will it show percentages. Okay. And the floating share starts up here in the clause that divides everything, divided into as many equal parts. And then we have one part, which is segment 1 going to Bart. And then it happened to be a Henson trust because Bart was disabled. And then we had segment 2 and et cetera. Okay, so that's that. Hope, does that just make sure that clarified? If not, please jump on with the mic and describe the question. So let me see if there's another one, not a gift over, but is there an easy way to gift an item, a boat, to an individual and then deduct the value from their share? When I tried to do that recently, there was no condition to opt out. So yeah, what we don't support that right now. We support that actually if it's more than one. Let me just try that. So let's try personal effects. Here, let me see if I go out of personal effects gift. Keep moving things around. Sorry, let's go like that. So if I picked one person, and so we don't really have a provision for them to deduct it from their share, but that's no reason why we couldn't. So that's a great point, Emma. Thank you. We're gonna do that. If I had more than one person, for example, then I picked the lottery, then what that's going to do, and I'm going to be counting it against their inheritance, then we have that. So maybe what we want to do is just add this very option to for if there's a single person, and then we're good, because that would do exactly what you want. So thanks for that, and we're going to add that to the list right now. Thanks, Emma. Tim, did I get your answer? Did that make sense?
So yeah, just thanks, Jordan.
Yeah.
So if there was one part was going to so and so, and that person wasn't living to receive the gift,
right?
The floating share flips it over to the other two parts.
Correct. You don't create that third part. That's the great thing about floating shares, and every will that's properly drafted uses floating shares for the residue.
So what if there was a gift over in that first part?
Then you'd still need, because what it says is, look at this. It says if at least one beneficiary referred to below is alive, deal with one part. So you could go all the way down to go through all the gift overs, right? And oh yeah, it's going to my brother John. Well, John was alive. The segment would be created. The part would be created because you need it. It's necessary.
Okay.
Okay. And that's how every will is drafted out. So you figure out, do you need this part? That's what, when we say is into as many as is necessary to affect the following distribution, you have to go through the entire gift to determine whether you need that part or not. And that's how every will is interpreted.
So there's a gift over within that part, right?
Right. If the gift over is applicable, there might be situations where there's no gift over applicable because the gift over is only if the beneficiary had survived initially, and then there's a gift over, right? Not if they predeceased. Yeah. So the wording of the will obviously matters when you're interpreting it, but assuming it's drafted the way eState drafts it, then it's proper, right? Okay. Because I'll show you what eState does by default. It assumes that you would want the same gift over whether Bart survives and then dies or just predeceases. So just to address that, you can see eState automatically says, if Bart's not alive on this, this is all about the stuff above that was all if he survived. Paragraph C is all about if Bart is not alive, then we want the same gift over, and it refers to all the different gift overs and properly drafts it to say determined as of the survival date. So it does that automatically. You don't have to worry about, oh my God, I forgot. What happens if he predeceases, right? It does that automatically. And as I would say with anything, and I know you know this, but you should always, whenever you're doing a complicated trust with a bunch of gift overs, it's always a good idea to read through it and make sure it's doing, what you want. Right? So.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, and that's really how floating shares work. It really changes. What it does is it changes your denominator, right? The numerator is you add up how many parts you have, but the denominator is how many total parts you had. And if Maggie wasn't alive and Maggie, it would go to the other segments, right? This is the gift over if you put in other segments for an absolute gift. I personally don't do that, but you can do it for sure.
Is that why there's always like a little script number above those ones for the absolute gifts? Do you see how so you just highlighted it at
right
the
here
there? Yeah, there's like a little script number.
Yeah, it's because I want you to carefully review it to make sure you're comfortable with it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, some of them I like, again, eState, works great and really complicated things. There's always something that you might not exactly want. And so, especially if it gets complicated. So I just want, in those high risk situations, I just kind of warn everybody, just make sure this is right. Yeah, this is right. Good. But again, whether this was here, okay, it's here now. If I deleted that, okay, then it wouldn't, like, this still does the exact same thing. Right.
And that's even if you have the other 2S trusts above.
Correct.
Okay.
Because this part, segment 3, never gets created if Maggie's not alive. Maggie's not alive, Margaret's not alive.
Okay, understood. So you would only really need it for the 2 above ones that have the trust in place, and then
Right,
that would be fine.
That's where people get in trouble, because they create trust, but they think about, oh, they're going to survive, but then what happens when they die and they haven't thought about, yeah, well, then it's going to go to John. Well, John might not be alive. Then what? Right. And so that's why we encourage that other segments section. Somewhere to see all of the clauses in the eState. Well, not really. There isn't a single place to see all of the clauses, because they're all dynamically generated. They're not just sitting there and we pull them. They're actually created based on what's going on above. Like, as an example, okay, this clause about the gift overs, they're all created based on what's the gift over before it and what's the gift over after it, and what date is it, and all of those things. So there really isn't a standard clause that we just plug in. It's all dynamically created, because it has to be different. If the first gift over was beneficiaries' children and the second is specific distribution, it's going to draft it differently than if it was the reverse. Or so sorry, it's, I guess. Certainly the standard clauses, we could probably show those. We could show you all the admin provisions, all the definitions. Those we can for sure show. If would that be, Brody, would that be helpful? Or is it something you kind of want to see what the residue clause is going to look like and those kinds of things? Because again, all of those are dynamically created. Right, the forfeiture clause. Thank you. Yes, I'm gonna send that over to you. Let me just do that. Brody, I'll get that to you today, okay? So that is, anyway, well, Brody, here, just so you know, this is and I'll send this to you, but this is, again, when it sees children being treated differently than other children, it automatically puts in a forfeiture clause and just warns you to think about including it. So this is the forfeiture clause that eState would generate. And I'm just going to send that. I'm going to send it over to you, Brody, right now. Okay. Anything else, guys? I hope, again, if you have questions about Giftovers and you're not sure, just reach out to us. And if Michaela isn't sure, and she usually is, but if she's not sure, she'll pass it to me and I'll get right back to you. Okay. Because they can, obviously they can get complicated. All right. Well, thanks everybody. And hope to see you guys again and see you on Thursday, Ian and Susanna, on multiple trustees and how to deal with disputes among them and things like that. So, hope to see you guys again. Thanks everybody. Take care.